My name, as most of you would know, is Les VanDenBerg. George VanDenBerg and I are brothers, and he and I are about the same age. Well, he was a lot older, of course, but he, because he loves each of you, and we know that, we would like to acknowledge everyone here today, but right now we would like for a woman who George claimed, and I didn't know that he could quote the Bible too much, but he said, by grace you are saved. We didn't know for a long time that he was referring to this lady. And so, Grace, would you stand up, please, and just be acknowledged? George's wife, Grace. We have, yes. Do you want to say something? Okay. So, could we ask who are relatives? Would you all stand up? All the relatives to George VanDenBerg. Up. Okay, thank you. Bud and Willa, would you stand up, please, again? I know it's good. You need some help getting up. But just stand up and be acknowledged. And is Willa right there by? Where is Willa? Oh, there's Willa.
Yeah.
This
just let him sit.
The patriarch of our family, Bud, and whatever he wanted us to do, of course we did, or suffer the consequences. And no, he was always very good to us. So, Brother Bud. So, I thought I really didn't know what to say, but you start remembering things, and I remember we were just kids, fairly young, and George, as I have said before, talks in his sleep. Well, so he got up, and none of us ever figured out how he did it, but there was a dresser with a mirror behind it against the wall in our bedroom. And he talked so loud that he woke us all up. And we went in there, and he was standing there on top of the dresser with his hands against the wall, reaching up as high as he could get, on his tiptoes. And so, what in the hell are you doing? He was, what are you reaching for? I said, well, I don't know. The top, I guess. And my dad said, George, there is no top. The sky is the limit. So we never did. The things that he did, that he reached for and kept reaching for, were important in his life. And so he the kind of the skullduggery things that we got into. But I thought, I might need some help from Orv and some other people, but we did things on Halloween, and that's probably some things we shouldn't be too proud of. But we were, or if you remember, we were over on this side of town, and we were just, looking for trouble to get into. And he said, well, that's, what was our math teacher's name? Anyway, he lived on a house there, and we were not too far from his house. And we said, well, it'd be a lot of fun just to scare the crap out of him. He deserves it anyway. So George picked up a rock and hurled that rock to his roof, because he had a tin roof, He hurled that rock at that roof, and we all watched that rock. Oh my gosh, it went right through his window. And he was sitting at the desk in front of the window. And we all looked at each other. It was what are we going to do now? And George said, we're going to go knock on the door. So we go down there and knock on the door. And he said, come on in, boys. Come on in. So we got in there, and he said, who threw the rock? And George said, I did. So we said, well, that was a crime. But he said, I think what I'll do is just make you pay for the window. And George said, I'll pay for it. So, he was in a lot of trouble, but that kind of showed his character, and that character followed him through the years. So, and then we went from there to John Stafford's. He had the fanciest 3-hole outdoor toilet in town, way fancy. 3-hole, that was a little excessive, but anyway, so we decided, we were turning all the toilets over one by one, and we just decided to go turn his over. And so we all got out there, and, it was really quiet too. So we got out there, and we got up there where we could start pushing, and this gigantic loudspeaker voice came on and said, go ahead, boys. I got the shotgun pointed at you. Boy, did that interrupt the party. So, there's, but a lot of stories and a lot of good things. I hate to steal somebody else's thunder, but I'll just tell you, the thing that George went to, and he was reaching, always reaching, but he went to a place that none of the rest of us have gone. He went and got his pilot's license. The reason he did is because he wanted to see those bighorn sheep from a different perspective. And so he got his pilot's license. It was, a big effort. And I would have to say, loving brother as I am, he was a damn good pilot. And he was an awful poor driver. He wasn't that bad, but his experience as a pilot, he got really good at flying in the mountains. And I mean really good. And so, his relationship with my parents, we finally talked, my dad was easy, but my mother, to get on that plane with George. So I rode in the back seat with her, and our mission was to fly over the Curricana cabin and look at it, and so she got on the plane, and she was so terrified, from the minute she got on. So we get up there, and George says, "Mom, we're flying over the cabin. I'm going to lay this over a little bit so you can see it." No, don't do. This thing will turn over. I know it will. So it just scared her to death. But she finally, of course, accepted quite a few of the things that George did. But he, when he was a kid, when he was a kid, he always provided wild meat for the family, and I did notice that after he became a commissioner on the Board of Wildlife, the terminology changed a little bit. Back in the days when he was killing those elk and deer, and once in a while something else, we called that poaching. But then later they called it harvesting. So poaching turned into harvesting. Well, my dad wouldn't let him kill anything unless we ate it. So everything we killed, we ate. That was the rule. So, and as far as I guess one other story about his driving. Okay, so I taught him to drive. I was a lot better driver than he was, and he knew that. And my dad, George was always my dad's favorite. I don't know if you knew that or not, but you worked with George on top of that stack a lot of times. Well, my dad claimed that as long as George was on top of the stack, that it saved him 2 men, because he needed 4 people up there, and Orville and George. But he got so he could push that hay, and of course, we were, Bud taught me to run that big John Deere with the farmhand, and that farmhand would, it would pick that, we had it buck rake in piles, and it would pick that hay up and take it in, shove it across that stack, and we had what we called a push-off attachment. It would scatter it all the way across the top of the stack. And we got, the crew finally got so good, we got as much as 50 ton a day. And so we stacked a lot of hay. And then just a comment about his later farming and haying is that competition never went away. And these kids, I call them kids, they're my grandkids, my grandsons, all 3 worked for George for, I don't know, several years. And but if you get curious sometime, there's a video on Facebook on my profile that has a picture of the bale wagon. And it's Garrett, my grandson Garrett, running the bale wagon. My grandson Caleb and I are on 4-wheeler, and I'm videotaping with my phone. But it's a pretty decent video, but it'll give you an idea that at the max, and it's probably, may not have the numbers right, but these guys got so good with the bale wagon that they could get 12, 13 loads a day, 165 bales a load. And so he repeated what we had done, and he did that for years. he was an absolutely top flight farmer. He loved farming. He was a top flight pilot. And so he was good. So the funny part was when Garrett moved on to a different position, then Hayden took the bale wagon over, and they were so good. But George was a lot like my dad. You know, he would criticize us for driving that John Deere too fast, and don't drive so fast. Well, you know, how do you expect us to get this done? You know, but we'd come in there with John Deere in fifth gear, fast as it would go, pick that load up, take it in. As the hay was scattering across the stack, we had it in reverse and the wheels were spinning backwards, and we were going. That's the kind of stuff these guys did. But they did it with a bale wagon. George couldn't even drive a bale wagon. You know, about, you know, an hour after these guys got onto it, they knew more about it than he did. So he wasn't good at the machinery part of it, but he was, and so just one more thing about the machinery thing. John Neely was George's partner in a ranch that they leased, 250 acres, wasn't it, Hayden? And so they leased this, and they did a lot of their own mechanic work and stuff. And so George, they got to fix something in the bed. He crawls under the baler. John, get me that crescent wrench over there. So John goes over. He's same age as George. And John goes over and gets a crescent wrench. And he walks over there, and George's laying there flat on his back, with his face up like this. And John says, I'm going to hand you the crescent wrench. Okay. And he drops it. Accidentally. Hits George right in the forehead. George, of course, cusses at him a little bit. And very affectionately, of course, because he still has to have him as a partner. But a lot of funny things. But I had to tell one more thing about his driving. When he was learning to drive, he had a terrible time talking my dad into loaning the car. Dad was a little worried about that, you know, so he made damn sure that George understood that he was responsible. Okay? When you go to the dance, you're going to be responsible for that car. And my dad I wouldn't say that he didn't care how late we stayed at the dance or how long we were out, but at 5 o'clock the next morning, we're going to work. It doesn't make any difference what time you got in. Didn't matter how much you drank. So we had the work ethic. But anyway, George, we went to the dance, and we were on the way home, just the other side of town. And it had snowed a little bit, just skiff, not much. We came around the corner into town, and the car slid off the road. And the next day, Clarence Drexel called my dad, and he said, was that your car that went through my whiteboard fence? George! So when George went through the fence, we got out and looked at that car, you know, and the the fender was bent into the tire. And we jerked on that thing, and we got it straightened out enough that we could get home. So at 5 o'clock the next morning, my dad was up and hollered at us and told us we had to go milk the cows. And George and I got up. We walk over to the upstairs window, and we're watching my dad. And he walks out there, and he walks around and looks at the car, walks all the way around it and looks. Then he just went on out to the barn. So I said, oh no. So we walk out to the barn and milk the cows. You know, my dad never said anything to him about that. But the punishment was greater because he didn't say anything. So we got that far, but he became quite a pilot, and we were flying. I got on with him in Grand Junction, and we were going to fly back to Durango, and we got up in the air, got over to Montrose, and it was just totally socked in. And he said, well, we flew around a little bit, and he said, we'll just go down to Montrose, and we're going to stop in on the Fries. That'd be Donna Sharon. So we went down, visited him a while, and then we got back on the plane, and we tried it again. We flew up there, and we got in that cloud fog. You could not see anything. And I said, I could feel my throat kind of tightening up. And I said, Judd, how do you know where you are? You gotta, he said, well, you got to have the instinct to know where you are. And he said, you got to have instruments that you trust. And he said, if you got those two things, you're good. So that's kind of the way he lived it. But we didn't fly through the clouds. We went around by Dove Creek and came in from the other way. So that was good. But he wrecked his plane. And where he did that was not in the mountains. I was talking to somebody, a pilot, about George, and he loved flying, and he loved flying in the mountains. But he wrecked his plane down here on the other side of Grand Junction. And when he did, his face hit the dash, and it just smashed his whole face, and he came out all bloody. But when he called us, I didn't even recognize him at the hospital. I couldn't even tell who he was. But his good buddy came over from Durango, Dennis, to help him, to be with him, and pretty soon they got to the point where they operated on his face, took his sinuses out, and redid his nose because he was smashed all over his face. And the surgeon said to George, he said, well, your nose, which, he had a pretty good sized nose, kind of a Roman nose, and what do you want me to do with this nose? And George said, how about a Robert Redford nose? So we're so fortunate to have the energy of George VanDenBerg here with us today, and we're so fortunate to have each of you. Thank you so much.
Could you just give me a hand here? There we go. Got it. Thank you, brother.
You bet.
Well, thanks, Cousin Les. My name's John VanDenBerg, and I'm George's cousin, okay? And I was named after my Uncle John, who, and he was a person everybody loved. And all the brothers named a son after him. So I'm in the room with my cousin, John VanDenBerg, all right? And there are others of us, but glad to be here, and thank you all for coming. George, of course, was born and raised here in Crawford, as my dad Charles was. My grandparents, Charles and Maggie, came here in 1907. I visited them this morning over in the churchyard here. But they had 10 children in that family. And I only had 3 kids. And I can't imagine putting 10 kids through college, all right? But what a wonderful family. My parents left here after World War II because there just weren't jobs here. And some of you may know that. But we ended up coming back to Crawford on family vacations. And to my dad, Crawford was like Mecca. Crawford was the best place in the whole world. And we'd come up the highway from Delta, and Dad would sniff and he'd say, "Smell that air, kids. It's the best air in America." Right? So it was really, I grew up just thinking, Crawford is really something. Wow. Okay. So, but again, Uncle Andy and Aunt Cleo and sisters Joanne, Dolly, and these brothers, just wonderful. You'd hit the slide for me, and just go ahead and turn to the next one. Okay. Now it's a little hard to see, but this is a picture of George's class. Okay. And I looked this morning at the rock when I drove up here, and this was taken actually right out on the corner of this building. Okay. So here's my question, and George is there in the photo, but is anybody that's in this photo in this room today? Anybody? Okay. Now, did any of you have relatives who would be in that photo? What's that?
My brother is in there.
Your brother's in there. Okay. Anybody else have relatives? Okay. How about you? Your mother's a teacher? Wow. Wow. That's great. But what a deal, it is. So next slide, please. George is about 8 or 9 in this photo, and what a great looking kid he was, Next slide, please. This is a little hard to see, but George is on the right there. And Cousin Bud and I were at a historical society meeting in Hotchkiss one day. And somebody mentioned VanDenBerg. And this woman just stood up. I didn't know her. An older woman stood up and she said, "That George VanDenBerg was the best looking man I ever saw in my life." Cousin Bud and I looked at each other and like, whoa. So anyway, it was great. I just loved it. Next slide. And again, George and Les on horses. Horses. Now, how many of you in this room have horses? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so a bunch of you. But to these folks, and my dad and his family, horses were a real big deal, okay? And I never had a horse, okay? I will tell you this, I'm slightly larger than your average VanDenBerg. And I was with I've worked with families my whole life. I'm a child psychologist. So I was with this family, and they had horses. And they said, "John, get up on a horse and ride here." And I said, "I've never been on a horse." They said, "No, you get on this horse." And I looked at this horse and said, "I'm too big for that horse. It wasn't that big of a horse, And he said, "Oh, come on, get up there. Don't give me an excuse. Get up on that horse." I don't think it's a good idea. But I got up there. I got on that horse, and that horse gave out the most awful sound you can imagine. It was like, "Oh," like that, And I quickly got off the horse. But I'm not a horse guy. But these guys were, okay? And, the whole issue of growing up here and horses up in Kirkana, I just want to share one story from Jim Oglesby, a good friend of George's that's in Oregon. He couldn't be here. He wanted to be here today. And, but I'm just going to read this story that Jim told me. Jim remembered going on a hunting trip to Kirkana with George to stay in the old cabin. By the way, how many of you have ever been to that old cabin up there? Ooh, okay, a number of us, yeah. They had a string of horses, and as they got further up the mountain, it started to snow very hard. After a while, it looked like they'd have to turn back. It was getting dark, and there's no way they could make it back to Crawford. They passed by a sheep herder's wagon on the way up, and they decided if they could make it to that wagon, they might be able to spend the night there. So they got the guy up. It was about midnight. So they got the guy up. They didn't speak English, but they communicated they needed to be in that little tiny cabin with him. And they did. And that's how they spent the night. And in the morning, they got up and went up the mountain with the horses. So horses were a real big deal for these folks. Next slide, please. As Cousin Les was saying, this you can see the farmhand machine here. This hay was a real big deal. George did tell me that his last crop in Durango, they got over 10,000 bales.
Yeah.
So it's a huge amount of hay. Next slide. And again, it's hard to see, but the Kirkana cabin was just an incredibly famous spot there. Next slide, please. And here's, I know it's hard to see, forgive me, but it's really everybody on horses ready to head for the Kirkana cabin. That's what they were doing. Next slide. So George was in the Navy, all right? All right. Who else in this room was either in the Navy or the Coast Guard? Got one here, all right. And Navy, right. Okay, anybody else? All right. Well, my dad was Coast Guard, or it was World War II, so it was actually considered the Navy then. But George went in the Navy, and we'll hear more about that when we have our military honors for George at the end of our time today. So next slide, please. So George married Alma and had four girls, okay? Now one of them is Diana, who lives right near, I live near Fort Collins, and Diana lives right near us, and we had her and her spouse over just recently, and she's a wonderful girl, but we shared George stories the whole evening, so, and she's got a lot of them, but next slide. So again, 4 brothers here and their wives. Ted's wife wasn't there, but these brothers were close, okay? How many of you have brothers in your life? How many you actually have a brother? Okay, so almost everybody does. You know that can be great, or it can be just sometimes a little bit touchy, okay? I'm seeing enough of you smile that you know exactly what I'm saying, right? But these guys were close and grew up together. And behind so much of what they did was called work, okay? Uncle Andy was the first person in this area to actually get a tractor and move from just horses. And so Uncle Andy got a tractor, but he had all these boys, all these great big boys here, you know? And George told me that he realized he could do hay 4 or 5 times as much hay as he could just with just horses. So George said, Uncle Andy, or his dad, Andy, just started farming those boys out all over this area, getting hay and working and making that happen. Next slide, please. Cheryl, his daughter, spoke at George's funeral, which was held in Durango. George died in November, but this is Cousin Bud really felt like a celebration of life for the Crawford folks. And all you folks was a great idea, and that's why you're here. So you could thank this guy right here if you want to know where we're spending our Saturday together. But it just is incredible. Next slide, please. I got Cheryl's permission from the funeral and her comments. And she said, my dad lived life on his own terms. He pursued what he wanted from life. Dad was very comfortable taking risks. And that's an understatement for George. I mean, I got a chance to talk to a number of his friends about their hunting adventures. And the common word across all of them was the word stranded. Okay. And we were stranded up on this mountain in a snowstorm looking for sheep, but it's incredible. But she said her dad loved his family, which he did, and just being able to be there for your family is really something. Now, how many of you in this room are hunters? Let's say you're a hunter. You go hunting. Okay, a lot of you. Now, how many of you have kept a taxidermist busy? You actually had animals that were, stuffed or whatever is the politically correct term, mounted, I guess that's it. So have any of you ever had an animal mounted? Okay, a number of you. But here's the deal. Spouses of hunters don't necessarily like to have those deceased animals on their walls, okay? And one of my cousins on my mom's side of the family, his wife said, my cousin's wife said, you may have one animal in the living room. That's it, okay? And so she did put a elk head up there with the antlers. But there's a woman here named Grace, okay? Right? Grace's wife here. And I'd like to show you the next slide. It's a little hard to see, but this is the living room that they have, okay? And these are, I don't know, a couple dozen stuffed and mounted animals, okay? Is that your living room? No. No? Whose is that? Donna's, okay, all right. I have it wrong, but
Mine
yours...
look much better.
Yours look much better. Okay, thank you, Grace. Okay, so, but anyway, I think that for George, having stuff on the walls was a real big deal. Next slide, please. So George was a hunter, okay, and as Cousin Les said, we had an Uncle Les. That's why I always call him Cousin Les. So, but George was a former two-term Fish and Game Commissioner for Colorado. Talk to me a little bit about the politics of that and doing that and getting appointed by the governor. But he was known as a sheep man. That was his real interest. His interest was in conservation. And proud of his grandchildren and children for being hunters. Next slide, please. George loved those grandkids, all of them. This photo is very interesting in that George told me the story about this photo. He said he was at a conference, and a man came up to George and said, "Have you seen the picture of this girl with this mountain lion?" Just came up and showed the picture to George, and George says, "That's my granddaughter." And the guy didn't really believe him, but he said, "No, give me her name. What's the granddaughter's name here?" Mindy, sorry. But he said, "That's Mindy." And showed him another picture of her holding this mountain lion up. So it was incredible. Next slide, please. George hunted the bighorn sheep. This is one that he took that was an award-winning trophy. Next slide. I'll just show you a few of George's favorite slides. This one is George and Grace with the world record bighorn. George didn't shoot it, but it's the biggest one ever shot. Next slide. George did shoot this grizzly bear in Canada, and there's a grizzly bear, stuffed grizzly, and a wolverine. Now, did you have this in your living room?
Yeah,
okay.
Still is there.
Yeah, still there. Yeah.
You had to take out a window to get it in. So
Yeah,
it's still there.
took out a window to get that in. Now, she was Grace was a little I don't have that many animals in my room. Anybody that has a grizzly bear and a wolverine in their living room, you're pretty tolerant. Thank you, Grace. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the world record and the Colorado state record bighorn. That was one of George's favorite photos. Next slide. George, like a lot of hunters in his later years, really turned to photography and became an expert at it. And I'm just going to show you several of his favorite pictures. Go ahead. This one he called Curious. of the sheep. This one is called Just Look. Next. This one's a good ram that he took a picture of. Next slide. And at one point, as Cousin Les said, he would fly around and look around the state, looking for good places to put bighorn sheep that weren't there. And I guess you needed this certain northern face rock wall and other things. And they would find these places, and then they would arrange for the state to bring in sheep from another part, either Colorado or Idaho or wherever, and put those sheep there. Well, George, being a Durango person, he wanted to see sheep in the Animas Mountains. Am I saying that right? The Animas area. And so at one point, they got 20-some sheep, and they put them on a train and took them up there. Now, George could not be there. He wanted more than anything to be on that train, but he had been in an automobile accident. As you know, we heard about his driving, and he was actually in a hospital in Denver, and he couldn't be there. But the trip went up. They released the sheep, and they went up and populated that area. 6 years later, George applied for a permit to hunt rams in that herd, and he actually went up there. So it was pretty amazing situation there. But we just want to stress, and this was my favorite picture of George. In 2017, Bud and I hosted the VanDenBerg family reunion here in Crawford. And this is my favorite picture of George from that reunion of all those relatives. I think we had 55 people of the VanDenBerg family there. So it's a great picture. But I want to, first of all, I've been married 45 years, okay, which is pretty much my entire life because I'm really young. But has anybody in this room been married longer than 45 years? Oh, my goodness. So how many years? 69. Oh, how about here?
51.
51. How about here? There was another hand over there. 63. All right. How about here? I'm sorry? 67. Wow. Woo! That's, I mean, I feel like 45 years, you're just getting to know each other, so. But I do think, next slide, please, that there's no way to say it, but George was proud of Grace. And so this is a happy couple here. So next slide, please. I want you to, there's a new video about George. We're not going to show it today because it's about an hour. But I have here a person I've worked with for 20 years, David Jacobson. In my work around the country and other countries, David would come, he'd do the training videos, he'd do the films, and he did a video on Crawford, okay, that Bud and I narrated. And if you go to this website, VDB space family space history, you can see the videos of George. And also, if you want to show your relatives who've never been to Crawford what Crawford is like, it's really quite a good little video that David put together and filmed for us. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. The other thing is we did a video, and this kind of leads into the military history, but we did a video, Bud did a video of Korea, okay? Are there any other Korea vets in the room? Anybody? Do we have any other Korean vets? Okay. But you really ought, if you don't know the Korean War, and I didn't, you ought to watch Bud's description of what that was like and how that changed our country. But I'd really recommend watching George's video and Bud's video as well. So we're going to, I'm just going to ask, there were so many people that had stories that we didn't have time, but I did ask Dave Dillon and Rick Ware to share with us a few stories, a couple of stories, brief stories, okay? But Dave and Rick, you want to come on up?
Rich.
Rich, sorry. You want to come on up and share? And this is the mic, David, right? That you gave to me?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
or video. Okay, we'll put these in your pocket there.
Okay.
This right next to it.
Two of them, John. Take that. One's enough for
Oh, okay, one's enough, okay. All right, got it. I'm just looking for my cane. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
By the way, if any of you have mosquitoes, they give you West Nile disease, that's what this is. So watch out for mosquitoes, okay? Go ahead, brother.
All righty.
Yeah.
My name is Rich Weir. I was a good friend of George for about 40 years, and we had a lot of interests together, the mountains, hunting, fishing, bighorn sheep. So Les called us and said, could you guys come up and tell a few stories? Well, we've got a few stories. Probably more than you guys want to hear, but one time, we'd been running together for quite a while, and we ran into a gal that we knew, and she said, are you guys related? I said, no, we knew of each other, and then we met up on the mountain, and then it just went downhill from there. When I first started running with George, he had some great mountain horses, and we'd go up
Stretching my legs a little.
in the wilderness and go on pack trips.
Little West Nile disease.
We had some adventures.
This will be great. Perfect timing.
One
for you
time
guys.
we went up above Viceta Reservoir. It's late fall, November. We're going to go look for bighorn sheep. And we unload the horses, tie them to a tree,
That's the
and
problem
it starts snowing.
with these phones.
It's just a whiteout blizzard. He says, well, let's get back in the truck and listen to the Bronco game.
I sent it to your,
So these horses
your
are out
work
there. You
account,
can't
but
hardly
the other
see the horses. It's snowing so hard. And he tells me, he says,
Hotmail, yes.
you know, I kind of think those horses are having a conversation. Just tell me why. And I said, George, I think they have that conversation quite often. Another time we were up on the mountain, we
issue
were
is
helping another
coverage.
guy had a sheep tag up there. I'm inside the sheep herder tent cooking dinner. George is out tending
There
the
it is,
horses.
great.
I hear
say I
this
could probably
god
remember
awful
about half of it.
crashing, timber breaking, horses bucking. I run out, I said, what's going on? He says, well, that one horse there has never had hobbles on, and you best just get out of the way. Another time, him and I made a hunting trip up the Yukon Territory. George is riding a horse, and he got a pack horse behind with a lead rope. Well, we've got a 18-mile horseback ride. Sometime during it, the horse slips his head out of the halter. George is riding up the trail, that halter's dragging behind. The horse is running off to the side, feeding, and then it'd run and catch up. One of the guides says, when's George going to realize that horse isn't back there? I said, the minute we get to camp, he will know. Another time we were going up looking for sheep, and it was on a weekend, and we spotted a pretty nice ram with some ewes, and they were way up on the mountain. And so the next Sunday, we're going to go back, and this time we're going to try to get some pictures. Well, George is running late. He calls me. He says he had to take his wife at the time to a church, and then they had to go to breakfast. But he says when he shows up, he says, but I had the whole congregation pray that we'd get to see that ram. And he said they said they would, but if we found him, we had to name him Hallelujah. One of George's famous deals, if we were going somewhere, filling up the snowmobiles with gas, and he'd run in to the place and get us some lunch. And the George VanDenBerg lunch special was always a couple cans of Vienna sausages and a handful of Almond Joys candy bars. We never got a variety. That was this lunch every time. We were snowmobiling one time, and of course we had to go till we got stuck. You didn't turn around. We get those things dug out, and now we're coming down off the mountain, and I'm chasing, trying to catch him. And he's got one of these kind of Elmer Fudd hats with the big earmuffs, and he's coming down the mountain, and those earmuffs are flapping in the wind. Get down to the truck, and I said, George, I wasn't sure if I was chasing you or a basset hound. Of course, he always just laughed. He never took anything offensive. One time snowmobiling, way back up in there, we kind of got stuck. Well, his snowmobile got stuck and broke down, so we jumped on mine, and he's heading down this canyon. And I said, are you sure we're not going to get rimmed out down here? Oh, no. We can just go right around and then climb back up, and we'll be good. Well, we get down there so far, and we come to a cliff. So he says, we're back in there 4 or 5 miles. He says, you're going to have to walk out and get help. So I did. I walked out and got help. And get back up there at midnight to get him. But these 2 guys came up and helped us. And I come over and I said, are you okay, George? Oh, yeah. He says, it wasn't that bad. There was a big old down log there with pitch coming out. He says, I got starter fluid from that snowmobile and sprayed it on here and there and lit it. There was flames coming out here and flames coming out here, coming out the roots, and he was just laying there next to it, watching the moon come up. I said, if I would have known you were so comfortable, I'd have waited till morning to come back to get you. In his, like I say, I had to walk out and get help a couple times, but his last year of life, we drove up on that ranch up above Iceto, and there was about a little over a foot of snow on the ground, and it got to a point where they hadn't plowed anymore, but it looked like somebody had driven on up in there. So we drive a little farther, and pretty soon we get stuck, and we can't back up, we can't go forward. So same deal. He says, Rich, you're going to have to get back to the caretaker's house and see if he'll get the tractor to come pull us out. I said, well, it's just another one from the memoirs, I guess.
You can go ahead and introduce Dave anytime you're ready.
Okay, just a couple more.
Okay, take it away.
They had a kind of a gathering for wild sheep hunters down the Doubletree in there in Durango. And a bunch of these young guys gathered around him and asking him how he's doing. And this was like a year or 2 ago. He says, you know, I haven't killed a sheep since I was 75 years old. But, you know, I'm going to miss all those big adventures with him, and more than anything, I think I miss his friendship and that laugh he had.
Yeah.
But thanks for inviting me up.
Take it away, Dave.
Just clip that on your pocket.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dave Dillon. I'm probably a 40-year friend of George's. Probably took up the last half of his life with our friendship. I'm from Durango. George, I'm afraid, would say, what the heck are you having this inside today for on a day like this? Anyway, starting off, I was born in Yerevan. Some of you might know where that used to be. And my dad was a uranium miner, as was George. And they didn't know each other back then when they were mining, but they mined pretty much the same area. A lot of the Slick Rock, Yerevan area, and some in Utah. And it was almost simultaneous, ironically, that my dad moved our family to Durango, and George moved his family to Durango. And I first, the first VanDenBerg name I heard was Lee, who moved there in grade school, and kind of went from there. Next thing I knew, my sister was hanging out with George's oldest daughter, and consequently I ended up meeting George based on interest primarily, hunting being one of them. We ended up working right across from the river from George's ranch, and sometimes we'd get in yelling matches across the river about who saw what where. But it just, like Rich said, it went downhill from there. So anyway, George got his pilot's license, I want to say early 70s maybe. And then a few years later I got mine. And as we compared notes later, it was all for the same reason, go look for wildlife. And so the more we hung around, the more we had in common, seemed like. And so fast forward 20 years, George is on the commission, and we ended up getting a company airplane. And George calls me up. He says, "Man, I've got a commission meeting in Aspen tomorrow." He said, "I'm having a hard time finding a way to get up there." I said, "Well, we'll jump in the company airplane," which was a little more airplane than what George and I had flown quite a bit of over the years, which was a Cessna. And that took a little more paying attention to than a Cessna. But anyway, as a crow flies from Durango to Aspen, guess what was right in line with it? Keurig County. So I take him to the meeting in Aspen, and on the way back, of course, he says, "Got to show you where I used to hunt." And this was a low-wing airplane, where the Cessnas are high-wing, and you can see out of them pretty good. But anyway, I noticed just before we got to Keurig County, one of the fuel tanks was getting kind of low. I thought, man, I need to switch that before. Well, first we start seeing some elk, a few elk, then a few more. Pretty soon the herd's 100 plus. Well, I forgot to switch tanks, and that engine died.
Gee.
And I went to grabbing chokes and primers and fuel pumps, and finally got it fired back up, and back to Durango we came. Well, we hit the ground down there and get out of the airplane, and George says, "I was looking for a place to land." I said, "Well, I was busy trying to get it running." But I so many stories. I could be up here till this time tomorrow without hesitation. But one of the stories I told
John.
Gosh dang, I forget your name.
John.
John, I'm sorry, John. On the phone, I said, I got a kick out of it. And George, I think he said he was with his uncle Charles, and maybe somebody else, but their pack trip up here to Keurig County. And of course, a lot of these stories George's telling me are in hunting camp and hunting camp stories. But and there was a lot of wind and down timber that year, and they'd come up to a tree that would just block the trail. There was no getting around it, and they didn't bring a chainsaw or a handsaw. And I'm sure you've heard the story, and maybe Bud was there. Were you? Well, I don't mean to take your story here, but it's a good one. George says, we didn't have a chainsaw, we didn't have a handsaw. We were SOL. And they started comparing how much ammunition they had amongst them. And they had 2 or 3 boxes with 2 or 3 rifles. And they sawed a hole through that tree with them rifles and all that ammunition. made it to Gear Camp.
That's funny. That's
Cracked
great.
me up. But back to some of the flying. George and I did a lot of flying. I mean, we'd fly up in the wilderness looking for sheep, and both of us, trade off flying. And one of George's requirements for me to sit in the left seat and be a pilot was, don't look ahead, look at the hill. Don't look ahead and see what you might run into. You look for sheep. So there was a lot of close calls regarding that. And,
But you had to watch out for him when he said, oh, there they are.
yeah, exactly.
Let's get down there a little closer.
We're already at the treetops. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee in the morning. Well, we met for coffee a lot, but a couple times we decided, this is awful good morning. Those mountains look clear as a bell. Let's go fly. Well, we'd had breakfast and a couple cups of coffee, and we didn't normally do that. We'd make plans the night before, get up early, go fly the airplane, come back and eat breakfast and drink coffee. Well, the couple times that we did it the other way around, getting back to the runway was pretty expedient. And needless to say, when the tires hit the pavement, the tires were locked up until we come to a stop. Both doors flew open, didn't even get off the runway. We had to go to the bathroom. One of many trips up in the wilderness with George and his horses, talk about a horseman. And there's one thing George knew about horses that most people don't. And that's that there's a lot of good horses out there, but 90% of them are barn sour. And George would keep his horses ridden, and when you climbed on one of them, you were good to go, period. Didn't matter who you were, that horse was going to take you where you wanted to go. So I admired him a lot for that. But on one of the trips, we decided, it was in the middle of the summer, but we were going to go up to Buck Camp and just look around, have a good horseback ride. Well, we decided we're going to go this is about 10 miles back in the wilderness. And we decided we're going to go fishing, but it's another 3 or 4 miles back to the good fishing lake. And so we get back there, and we can't wait to get a wet line, because there's, in this particular lake, Castile Lake, there's some really, really nice fish there, but they're hard to catch. And so after about 30 minutes, not even a bite, George and his patience, when it come to fishing, he didn't have it. If he didn't catch a fish, he's done. Well, I had a little more patience. And I hooked a big old trout. Anyway, the Castile Lake trip, we're back in there a long ways in the wilderness. And George is played out on fishing. He's now glassing for sheep or deer or elk or whatever. And I'm hanging in there because I'm a little more patient. And finally, I hook a pretty good trout, and I reeling it in, and George looks over his shoulder and sees the fight in the pole, and puts his binoculars away and grabs his pole, and pretty soon we start catching, it's time to catch fish, and they're biting. And having a little more innocence than George did on a lot of subjects, I asked George, I said, back here in the wilderness on these high mountain lakes, I said, George, what's our limit? He says, well, depends on how far you are from the trailhead. On that same trip, now we're back what we call Buck Camp. And on this trip, George had borrowed some panniers from his brother Bud. And because sometimes George didn't have everything together, that really wasn't a priority. And, you know, food and other stuff sometimes was marginal, as Rich explained. But on the way up, I said, you know, do we need to stop and get some stuff, George? No, I got panniers from Bud. Well, I didn't know what that meant, you know. So we spent the night that night and had Bud's panniers, which were phenomenally stocked. Perfect. You've never seen pannier. The dishes were clean. Everything was in order. And I didn't know it was night and day between George and Bud. But it was. When it come to panniers, it was. So we spend the night, and the next morning we get up. It's a little bit stormy. But we saddle up, pack up, and George takes one last look in Bud's panniers, and there's a full box of wine. And it's 8:30 in the morning. George says, is there any reason we ought to pack this back out? And he starts pouring wine. So we get wined up, and out we go. Well, here comes a thunderstorm that was. And we got on top of the ridge, 12,000 feet. And we're lining out across that ridge, and a bolt of lightning hit. I mean, from here to the back of the room. It didn't phase either one of us. We just kept riding. We had so much wine to drink, it didn't matter. But it was pretty impressive. Another time, like Rich has explained, a few others, we had snowmobiles that were, you know, half-life maybe. And we head up to look for sheep early one morning. It snowed over a foot the night before. And the machine I had was, say, half-life, and I'm in the lead. I'm breaking trail. And it's quite a ways. We're back in there 5 miles. Well, George is behind me. My machine working pretty hard to break that fresh snow, and locks up the engine. Just stop. And George pulls up and he said, you couldn't pull the pull rope.
We can hear you guys out across the
But we still had one machine that would run. You think we turned around, put 2 of us on that old machine of his, and off we go. We get about another mile. That engine locks up. So anyway, we both walked out from there that night. Anyway, I'll let whoever
Thank you,
else
Dave.
have the floor.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I
Thanks,
could
Dave.
go on and on. Thank you for
Thank you,
having me.
brother. Yeah.
Thanks, Les.
Grace, you want to say
You
any
bet,
comments?
bud.
Grace is we're gonna put this on you. This is the mic. Just hook it right on your collar there. Oh, hold on a second. There you go. Okay. Is that working okay, brother? Yeah.
I just want to tell everybody thank you so much. And ladies, I feel terrible having to say this, but you know you love your husbands and you think they're the most wonderful. But I'll tell you what, I had the most wonderful. He was anything and everything that any of us could possibly want in a man. He was every ounce a man. He was generous, he was loving, he was kind. He made so many friends and made them for me as well. I could go on and on and on, but enough is enough. The one big thing he gave me was his family, the most loving family, and I know so much of it came from here in Crawford, that George was always so proud of and loved so much. So to all of you, I'm sorry, ladies, but I did have the best.
Thank you. I'll take that. Thanks. Appreciate it. Got it. Okay, I am going to turn this over to Dave Cotton. Dave, you want to take it away, and I'll put this on your... Thank you. Just clip that into your front pocket there.
Okay. Get out of the way of my glasses, gotta have those.
There you go.
So I didn't know George, met a time or two, but didn't really know him. My brother, Orville, knew him fairly well, I believe, and a few others that I know around here. I asked John anything we had that we could talk about military. Really wasn't much.
Because we can hear you.
He served in the Navy in 55, sounds like, around 55. So he went to basic training. He had to qualify with rifles. And for some reason, George couldn't close his left eye. So he couldn't shoot. He had to have both eyes open. So I'm not sure what the whole story was. He had to qualify left-handed. And by the time they got through with all the qualifications, he qualified second in all of these guys at basic training. That was left-handed. So he must know how to shoot. I'd heard that before. He got assigned to a ship, and I can't say the name of that ship. Algerholm? Maybe some of you know it, Algerholm. Okay. He was kind of bored, I think. From what I understand, he needed to be active. So didn't know what the best job would be. And another fellow told him the best job on the ship is to be a barber. So what George do? He became the barber. And that's what he did on the ship. The one thing about his service, although it was not military, it was military time but not combat time. Same with me. We were in the military. We didn't see combat. But George said it changed his life forever, going in the military and doing what he did, and I can attest to that. Everybody that goes in the military, whether you see combat or not, it changes your life. It shapes the rest of your life. And I think that happened with George. So as I do on our program, I'm the commander of the American Legion here in Crawford. Pretty small legion. But we do, first of all, Bud asked me if I could do the service for George. And, excuse my language, I said, oh, not only hell yeah, but we'd be honored to do that service. That last name and any military veteran deserving of military honors. So we're going to do military honors for the American Legion style. With that, be a little prepared. We'll do a little bit of talking, not much. And then I'll ask the Legion to salute the dead. There'll be some gunfire, so be prepared. I've done these services a couple times when I had people jumping out of chairs. They didn't know the guns was going to go off. So we're going to have some guns going off here in a minute. Another veteran has been called to the high command and has gone on to report to the commander of us all. Chaplain.
Eternal God, we thank Thee for this gathering of respect. Make us worthy, we pray Thee, to guard our heritage of pride through all the years to come. In memory of these, our dead, may we pledge to our beloved land the same service and same devotion. Hear now the sorrows of those who mourn. Touch their tired hearts with healing. Protect them with your holy care. Keep clean and bright in memory the splendid flame that now has flickered out, and shelter us with your compassion. O Lord, secure to us evermore the peace for which others have died. Amen.
This moment is sacred with the almost visible presence of the one who has gone before us. we come to honor the memory of one who offered life and service for God and country. Proudly we remember their service. Because of them, our lives are free. Because of them, our nation lives. Because of them, the world is blessed. May the ceremonies of today deepen our reverence for our honored veteran and friend. Veterans and friends, let us here pledge ourselves anew to united service, to consecrate and sanctify our comradeship by a devotion to mutual helpfulness in the protection of those left behind. Farewell to our friend, brother, and fellow veteran. On behalf of the President of the United States Navy, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as an emblem of our appreciation of Georgia's honorable service.
Proudly so.
Thank you.
We are missing a packet.
Okay,
A funeral.
okay, yeah,
Ask if anyone has it and ask them to be sure
Good
to
deal.
sign in.
okay.
Thank you, John.
Be open. Willa noted that we're missing a packet of some flyers. If anybody sees it, let us know. Folks, that's it. We're so pleased that you came out. Thank you all for coming, and take care. Thank you.
You're good.
What's that? Oh, yeah, I'm glad to do it. Glad to do it. Such an honor.